Hi, I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council, and on this November 11th, Veterans Day, I want to give an enormous thank you to all of our veterans for your service. Now, I missed Monday's council recap because I had to bolt from the city council meeting right after the meeting was over to go pick up my daughter. So better late than never. The first thing I want to address is the special meeting we had beforehand on Monday about density. I had asked for this meeting after our city council retreat about a month ago because it occurred to me that this council, who's been together now for more than a year, has never had a meaningful discussion on the topic of density, which is one of the primary issues that's been facing Plano for several years, and it comes up in every election in recent Plano history. And yet we've never discussed it in a meaningful way. We dance around it whenever certain zoning cases come up, but we don't actually tackle it head on. So we started to do that this Monday. We discussed land use and the effects of density on our city. I'm not going to recount the whole thing. It lasted a couple of hours, but I'm going to touch on some highlights. Number one, and I led with this, there has been a narrative for several years now that opposition to higher density or high density developments like apartments is based in racism. It's just not true. I've spoken since I started my campaign almost 2 years ago. I have spoken with thousands of Plano residents, and the concern is not about race. The characterization is that opposition to apartments means that we don't want the sort of people who live in apartments. It's just not true. Statistically, there may be a couple of people out there for whom that's true, but the concern is the density we already have. We're nearing, after Cullen Creek and Beacon Square are built, we'll be near 40% apartments in our housing mix. That's an enormous ratio. If we were around 10%, nobody would care, just as they didn't care when we were around 10%. So it's very important to focus on what the actual issues are. As 2020 has shown us, when we get rooted in demagoguery, back and forth, we don't make any actual progress. We don't do anything actually useful. So that's why I wanted this meeting, to cut through some of the misnomers and for all of us, as I said, to come to a common understanding, if not a common position. Now, the fact is that Plano has the second highest density out of any large city in Texas, any city with a population greater than 250,000. It was brought up in the discussion that we can't compare Plano to a city like Dallas because, number one, Dallas has a great big airport and a lot of waterways in the middle of it, whereas Plano doesn't. Okay, that's fair. So I did the math. Dallas has 3.5 times the population of Plano. And after you remove the airport, Love Field, and after you remove the square miles taken up by waterways, the city of Dallas is still 4.5 times larger than Plano, which means, even accounting for the airport and all the waterways, we still have a greater population density in Dallas than the entire city of Dallas in aggregate. That doesn't mean we have a higher population density than downtown Dallas or even uptown. I haven't measured those, but we still have an enormous population density, and that still has an impact on various aspects of quality of life. It is, of course, not the sole determinant of quality of life, because you can be miserable out in the sticks where you're all alone, and you can have a great life in places like Legacy West, which have a much higher concentration and higher density. But for the city as a whole, there are impacts to public safety. If we are to have police and fire that respond appropriately, we need those resources and we need the training to address a higher density situation. And as Chief Russian, former Chief Russian, Deputy City Manager, now Russian, said to the Comprehensive Plan Review Committee back in February, the more people you introduce to an area, the greater the opportunity for crime. That's regardless of the housing type. So the more people you pack in, the more opportunities you have for crime, statistically speaking. Likewise, there's the undeniable impact of traffic. Unless you have a high density city that is built for mass transit, which we are not, then you're going to have a traffic impact. Now, there is unquestionably a lot of traffic going north to south because we're the only thing standing between North Texas and the city of Dallas. There's also a ton of traffic going east to west. I used to have more than an hour commute going from East Plano to West Plano. Never mind the north-south traffic, that's just east to west. And I personally have sat through up to 6 cycles of the light heading eastward on Spring Creek Parkway at Preston. Just waiting for the light to turn, one cycle after another until I could finally make it through. This would not be the case if there weren't so many people on the road. So of course, this is a challenge. And greater density brings more people, which bring more cars, especially in a city that is built for automotive traffic, as ours is. In fact, this whole region is built for automotive traffic. A couple of the other things we discussed in the density meeting were to whom we're responsible as a city. I've always said that our primary responsibility as a city council is to the people who already call Plano home rather than to the people who want to call Plano home. That's not to say that that's our only responsibility, but what we want to do is make sure that the Plano that we serve today is the Plano people still want to live in tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, and the decade after. Because of course, all of our decisions now have long-lasting ramifications and shape the city of a decade from now. So we want to make sure that Plano remains an attractive city of excellence. This doesn't necessarily mean it has to be more dense. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be less dense. But the people have said overwhelmingly that the type of housing we lack the most is smaller footprint ownership options. This was even the case during the Plano Tomorrow process, the Plano Tomorrow Plan process. The surveys that were sent out to Plano residents asked, what do you think is most desirable and least desirable for the future shape of the city? The number one response in terms of most desirable was these smaller footprint, smaller lot housing. And the least desirable was high density multifamily. So that's what the people who live here said. And that's whom our primary responsibility, our first and foremost responsibility is to. Mayor Ricciardelli brought up the point that, the very valid point, which I kind of paraphrased earlier, that our responsibility is to make sure that people continue to see Plano as a desirable place, whether it's to move here or to remain here. And we want to cultivate a vibrant blend of business opportunities, economic opportunities, healthy living, top public safety, everything that goes along with what we already have in Plano. So as we discuss density considerations in the coming days, we can't necessarily tell property owners whether they can rent or own. Well, we can check on the legality of that. But one of the legitimate and stated goals of zoning in the state of Texas per statute is to limit growth and density. So that's something that the Comprehensive Plan Review Committee is taking up now. And if we are to look at our city holistically, which we always should be, instead of one little parcel at a time in isolation, then we need to consider the overall impact of our density, both in terms of housing and commercial, and multifamily versus single family. Now, I think it's important to note, one of the points I brought up, and I've mentioned this before, is we're also about at 40% rentals versus ownership in Plano. Now, people who rent, statistically speaking, on average, they don't take the same measure of care with their property as owners do. It's just a fact. They don't have the same motivations, so why should they? So the greater the percentage of rental property we have, the less care will be taken to our properties overall. And also, since many people live in apartments as a temporary place, like Mayor Ricciardelli said when he came here from New York, he lived in an apartment first until he got a house. Many people are like that, and that's totally fine. But it speaks to the transient nature of many of the people who live in apartments. They are not there for the long haul, and so they don't take the same measure of care for their property as homeowners do. So we've got to bear that in mind. People who own property have much more skin in the game. And if too few people have skin in the game, then it destabilizes the community. We then went into the preliminary regular meeting the preliminary open meeting. And we had discussed doing a council charity challenge for this holiday season. And Councilmember Grady had forwarded me an idea, which I love, and that is for each council member to be posted at a separate Salvation Army bell ringing station. And we can promote people to come give to our stations. So come ring our bell, but bring gloves, it's gonna be cold. So I actually put that on the agenda for the next meeting, so we'll discuss the parameters of that. And we can even get other municipalities involved nearby and other council members, school board members, etc. Then we moved to our regular meeting. We had two proclamations. The first was this today as Veterans Day, and again, a big shout out to all our veterans. The second was that November 15th through 22nd, next week, is Homelessness Awareness Week. And by the way, our next homeless census will be on January 21st of next year, 1/21/21. So the biggest item, I should say, on our agenda was the Legends at Chase Oaks apartment upgrade, I should say. It's an apartment complex off of Legacy and Alma. And the property owner, this property was built or approved, I should say, in 1995. It was changed from single-family attached townhomes to apartments under the condition that the density would be not dissimilar from single-family attached. And that was the basis on which it would be built. The owner of the apartments would like to build, it was 124 additional units, going from 346 to 470. And they wanted to use the additional income to fund upgrades and refurbishments and modernization of their existing units. They would reduce the setback from 70 feet to 25 feet and reduce parking from 2 spaces per unit to 1 space per bedroom, and to allow tandem parking. That means 1 parking spot where 2 cars are stacked front to back. So you'd have to coordinate backing out if you were the first person in there and needed to get out. This ended up being denied 6-2. Some of the key reasons, as Mayor Pro Tem Prince brought up, she was very hesitant about sending the message that the way to upgrade, the way to update your property is to add additional buildings for rent. I agree with this. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Ricciardelli also agreed. Now, I want to state first that I am very appreciative of the applicants, the property owners' desire to update and upgrade their property. But I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Prince that the way to do that should be to invest in the update for existing and perhaps future tenants. And I'm given to understand that it has 94% occupancy currently. But that the marketplace, this is how Mayor Pro Tem Prince put it, the marketplace would reward them, or should reward them, if they do it properly. So if they were to capitalize the cost, they anticipated about $12,000 per apartment upgrade. If they were able to capitalize the cost of that over a decade, say, then for all existing units, then that investment shouldn't necessitate more than $100 per month increase in rent on average per apartment, which should be less than a 10% increase for a total refurbishment. Now, what they could do, they don't have to wait that long. They could do it chunk by chunk and spread the cost out, but that's up to them. In any case, the concern there was that that we didn't want to send the message, we didn't want to set the precedent that for anybody to update their apartment, they had to add, or their apartment complex, they had to add additional units to make it happen. The second concern, which I brought up, and it was noted in the P&Z meeting, that the proposed plan for the update did not conform to the land use map. I don't believe it conformed to the growth and change map of the comprehensive plan, nor to existing zoning. There were apartments around there which had greater density and a smaller setback. However, they were all built prior to this complex. And specifically this complex, remember, was built under the condition that the density mimic and the features mimic the single-family attached zoning, which it had been zoned prior. So this would considerably change that. It would erode the setback by 2/3 of the distance. and it would increase the number of apartments by more than a third. I don't consider that a minor change, which is what the growth and change map calls for, very minor changes. So ultimately, this was denied 6-2. We then went to a consideration for an update on downtown zoning. The update, which was going to be presented to council, staff asked that it be remanded back to planning and zoning because some downtown business owners had expressed concerns after it had passed out of P&Z 7-1. So I asked in the meeting on Monday how it had made it so far and come to us without the business owners being aware of it. Come to find out that we post these zoning changes like this in the paper, in the newspaper, as required by state statute. I haven't looked it up, but I suspect that statute is decades old. So what I've asked for is to explore an electronic mechanism with technology that we already employ in various ways, so that a property owner, particularly a commercial property owner, can register their property address and an email address and automatically be emailed with a notification of any proposed zoning changes. That way, the moment we start considering a zoning change, they can be notified. They don't have to wait until after P&Z to find out, which should be a much more efficient process and provide for greater transparency. Then we moved to to update the utilities code of the City Code of Ordinances. This is to apply the new drainage and stormwater rates, which were actually passed a couple of months ago, but we have to update the Code of Ordinances. Lastly, we adopted the 2021 City of Plano legislative program. I got to give kudos to Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Ricciardelli. At the meeting, which was about a month ago, I think, where it was discussed adopting the 2021 legislative priorities or legislative program, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem had significant concerns about the language in the program, stating that the city may do this, that, or the other, had a whole bunch of statements. I had interpreted those statements at first blush to mean that these are possibilities that the city may do. What Deputy Mayor Pro Tem was concerned about was that they would grant the city staff authorization to, the city may, in a permissive manner of speaking. And he kept up at it. He made sure that we were of the same understanding. And because of that, we went back to bat, and the legislative committee, which is the mayor pro tem, and the deputy mayor pro tem, made suggested revisions and discussed a new process. And so this was unanimously adopted on Monday night, I'm very pleased to say. That's it for this council recap. Please note that we are going to have several events upcoming, and please stay tuned for the prospect of ringing our bell. I'd love to spend a day out ringing the bell, collecting money for a fantastic charitable organization, and I'd love you to come out and see me. Thank you very much. Goodbye.